Welcome to this podcast on a selection of books in Islamic finance. I'm Usman Hayat from CFA Institute, and joining me to discuss the topic is Professor Rodney Wilson, who is Professor of Economics at Durham University and a well-known expert and writer in Islamic finance. And in this podcast, I would be asking Professor Wilson to share his suggestions regarding some of the publications in Islamic finance which are relevant for professionals working in financial services. Welcome, Professor Wilson.
Thank you.
So to put things in perspective, let's start with the broader issue of Islamic economics. And I know that you have co-authored a book on the subject. Perhaps we could start with that book.
I think if you're looking at Islamic finance, it's important to know something about basically Islamic economic principles. And what this book attempts to do is to provide a guide to those principles as they've developed over hundreds of years, essentially. I wrote this with Ahmed Al-Ashkar, who is from Egypt, and he's worked indeed for the Islamic Development Bank in the past. We worked on it over a 15-year period, so a very long period indeed, and it was published by Brill in 2006. It basically covers more or less everything from the early years of Islam right up to the present day. But obviously a lot of the developments in Islamic economics have been in the last half century or so. So it covers those developments in considerable detail, looking at the work of people like Shapra, Nejdullah Siddiqui, Bakr al-Sadr, and so on. But it also looks at earlier work. For example, the great Muslim philosopher Ibn Khaldun, who had a moral theory of the business cycle. I think it's very interesting to look at the historical material, not just the contemporary material, and that's what this book attempts to do, basically.
And what introductory text on Islamic finance would you recommend?
Well, a very useful text is this new book by Hans Visser, which is published by Edward Elgar in 2009, published here in the UK and also co-published in the United States. And it gives a very clear introduction to the basic principles of Islamic finance. It says a bit about Islamic economics and Islamic economic ideas. It talks about zakat, talks about riba, talks about gharar. But it also looks in some detail at Islamic contract law and Islamic banking, and then looks at sectors such as insurance to kafil and housing finance. So it goes from sort of general to specific, but it is very well written and very clear. And I think it's also not a long book. It's relatively compact, 184 pages, including the index, and it's got a useful glossary, and of course an extensive bibliography as well for those that are interested in reading further.
A lot of the literature in Islamic finance deals with legal issues, both Sharia as well as the secular law. So what are the publications you would recommend which would have this legal perspective?
I think a good starting point is Mahmoud El-Gamal's book called Islamic Finance, Law, Economics and Practice. It's published by Cambridge University Press, which gives an indication of the quality of the book, basically. Essentially, Mahmoud El-Gamal is a professor at Rice University in Texas, in Houston. Basically what he tries to do is to provide an introduction to Islamic finance and Islamic financial concepts, but very much from a legal perspective, mainly I guess you could say an Islamic legal perspective, a Sharia perspective, because he himself is a Sharia scholar. He's quite critical of current Islamic financial practice, and of course not everyone appreciates his criticisms, but I think it's very useful because it does he does raise valid points of criticism that I think should be addressed, and indeed are being addressed. But certainly there's a lot in this book which I think is worthy of attention, and as I say, the fact it's published by Cambridge University Press and there's been a very strictly refereed book speaks for itself. It has been well reviewed, so I'd certainly recommend it. So this is a fairly recent study, 2006. It came out, and it still is a sort of the major study in this area, major contemporary study. The other sort of classic book in terms of Islamic law and finance is the one by Frank Vogel and Sam Hayes. They're both basically professors at Harvard University. Essentially, Frank Vogel is a law professor with a great knowledge of Sharia. So they got together. Sam Hayes has worked and still works for the Harvard Business School. So these two professors got together and worked on this book, basically. And it is a sort of a classic in its field. It has established a kind of, if you like, very much the agenda in terms of how one looks at Islamic finance institutions from a legal perspective.
What books would you suggest on political economy of Islamic finance? And please feel free to include the book that you co-edited, The Politics of Islamic Finance.
We'll have a look at 3 books under this sort of heading. The first one is Ibrahim Wardeh's book, which is called Islamic Finance in the Global Economy. The first edition came out in 2000, and there's now a second edition, which has come out in 2010. It's published by Edinburgh University Press. It has a very extensive series in Islamic studies and indeed in Islamic finance. Ibrahim Wardeh's study, I think, is very useful. It does provide a fairly self-contained kind of textbook from a sort of political economy perspective. And what he's done in the second edition is kind of bring all that up to date, actually. So it really comes right up to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis and its immediate aftermath. And essentially, it's wide-ranging, this book, but I think very useful from the point of view of giving a sort of political economy perspective. So it'll be of interest to a certain type of reader, but I think it shouldn't be ignored by finance professionals because it is very accessible. It's easily readable, and it does give you, as its title implies, a kind of a global perspective. So it's very useful in that sense. The second political economy book is basically the one which a series of papers which was edited by Clement Henry and myself. Clement Henry is Professor of Government at University of Texas in Austin. And he's basically he's been working on the Middle East, Islamic world, and Islamic issues and Islamic finance for many years. I myself, of course, have been working on this for the last 30-odd years. But what this was a conference which was held at the European University Institute in Florence. We brought a lot of people together, and they presented papers dealing with different aspects of basically Islamic finance in a range of countries. It's very much kind of country focused, and there are case studies of Sudan, Kuwait, Jordan, Turkey, Tunisia and Egypt. Now, you'll note it's not comprehensive. It doesn't cover Southeast Asia, for example. It doesn't really cover the Gulf apart from Kuwait. So it's got its limitations, but nevertheless, I think it is quite a useful guide to the kind of politics of Islamic finance, certainly as far as the Mediterranean countries are concerned, particularly Turkey and the North African countries. And I think it was published first published back in 2004, republished in 2005. But the issues that are identified with respect to North Africa and the Middle East are still very much there. Things haven't changed a lot, actually. So that's the second one from a political economy perspective. The third one is written by Charles Tripp, who is at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and it's called Islam and the Moral Economy, The Challenge of Capitalism. And it was published in 2006, and it's also published by Cambridge University Press. As its title implies, the subtitle implies, what it's trying to do is to position Islamic banking and Islamic finance in relation to the capitalist system. And we've got this idea that you've got capitalism, socialism, and then Islam as a sort of third alternative somewhere in the middle. He partly subscribes to that, but I think goes beyond that. And if you like, the changing balance of global power and the influence that Islamic economic and financial ideas can have in the financial arena, basically. So I think this is an important book, and it does help to provide, I think, a very useful political economy context.
And are there books written by academics which focus on the needs of practitioners?
There's a number of these. One book I would recommend is this Handbook of Islamic Banking, which is edited by Kabir Hassan and Mervyn Lewis. Mervyn Lewis is a professor of banking in Australia, and Kabir Hassan's although he's of Bangladeshi origin, he's an American citizen and has basically been in the United States at the University of New Orleans for quite a long time. They put this basically edited volume together, and it essentially covers a lot of the actual operational issues in Islamic banking and how the instruments work, and indeed how Islamic financial systems work. And then there's a section on globalization of Islamic banking. It's published by Edward Elgar. It was published in 2007, and it's available in paperback as well as hardback. I think it's very useful because if we actually look at the contributions, it covers things like, for example, operational efficiency and performance of Islamic banks. It covers issues of marketing of Islamic financial products. So it's very much business orientated. The next book I would recommend, written basically edited by academics for practitioners, is a book which has just appeared, in fact, again published by Edward Elgar in 2010. And it's called Islamic Banking and Finance in the European Union. There are some background chapters on basically Islamic banking business, and that's what the section is called. It's a flavour of what it's about. And then there's a section which looks at the various challenges and then the responses of European countries to basically Islamic finance, how Islamic finance is developing in different European Union countries. Fahim Khan worked for many years for the Islamic Development Bank, but basically Mario Porzio's a professor of banking law at the University of Naples in Italy. It was the outcome of a conference we had in Rome a couple of years ago, and this has now appeared as the book from that conference. So again, if you're interested in what's happening in the European Union, this is the book to have a look at, including what's happening in the United Kingdom itself. So I'd commend that book.
And what would you recommend on takaful or Islamic insurance within the realm of Islamic finance?
Well, yes, I mean, last year in 2009 there was a new study appeared, and it was edited by Simon Archer, Rifat Karim, who's in charge of the Islamic Financial Services Board, and Volker Nienhaus, who's very well known in Islamic finance circles. And it basically deals with takaful and the various challenges to takaful. It was published by John Wiley, and it is readily available. Essentially, takaful is quite a fast-growing industry, particularly in Malaysia, but in other countries as well, including the UK. So I think the reader who's basically interested in insurance will get a good idea of how takaful differs from conventional insurance. Essentially, the book covers all the fundamentals which are needed. Again, written by three people or edited by three people that know a lot about the takaful industry.
Are there also publications which are written by practitioners and are meant for practitioners? Well,
the main publisher of these is Euromoney. And Sohail Jaffer has edited a number of these books for Euromoney. The most recent ones include a book on Islamic investment banking that was published in 2010 this year, and basically it's become the kind of, I guess you could say, the definitive study of Islamic investment banking. Islamic banking has been more developed at retail level and at investment banking level, but there's quite a lot happening in investment banking. There's a foreword by the Lord Mayor of London, and commending the book. So I would certainly commend this, as indeed the other Euromoney studies, as highly professional books written by Islamic finance professionals, for professionals basically. The other Euromoney book I'd like to mention is Islamic Wealth Management, a Catalyst for Global Change and Innovation. This was also edited by Sohail Jaffer, and this one appeared last year, 2009. And it deals with, as its title implies, wealth management issues, mainly fund management, but also wider asset management issues. So it's pretty comprehensive, and as I say, it's a big book. Like most of the Euromoney studies, it goes to nearly 500 pages, but the articles themselves are relatively short. The reader probably won't want to read through all the articles, but if you acquire this book, it's a question of looking at the articles that obviously relate to your own particular interests. And there's plenty here which I'm sure Islamic finance professionals will find of considerable interest. And indeed, not just Islamic financial professionals, but other people in, for example, wealth management or private banking that want to learn something about Islamic principles in relation to wealth management, basically. So again, I'd commend this book.
This concludes our podcast on a selection of books in Islamic finance. Thank you, Professor Wilson, for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Copyright 2010 CFA Institute. No part may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, recording, or otherwise, without the express prior written permission of CFA Institute. This program is designed to give accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is distributed with the understanding that CFA Institute is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, tax, investment, or other expert advice. If legal advice or other expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought.